She posed as German, the Jewish woman who survived in plain sight. Germany, 1943. Intro: The Impossible Moment. Berlin, March 15, 1943, 9:47 a.m. Anhalter Bahnhof train station. Marie Jalowicz froze in the middle of the platform as a Gestapo officer walked straight toward her. She was wearing a coat stolen from an Aryan woman, forged papers in her pocket, and a secret that meant instant death. She was Jewish in the heart of Nazi Germany. No yellow star, no permission to exist. Technically, a corpse that was still breathing. The officer stopped a meter away. His eyes scanned her from head to toe. Marie felt her heart seize. After 19 months living illegally in Berlin, after surviving dozens of close calls, this was it. Her moment had finally arrived. "Fräulein," the officer said. Marie looked him straight in the eyes. Not with fear, with the absolute certainty of an Aryan Berlin woman who had nothing to hide. It was the most dangerous trick she had learned. The guiltier you are, the more innocent you act. "Yes?" she answered, with the slightest impatience, as if he were interrupting her. "Your ticket, please." Marie handed him the forged ticket she'd bought on the black market. The officer examined it, checked the stamp, handed it back. "Have a good trip," he said, and walked away. Marie boarded the train on legs that barely held her up. She sat by the window, surrounded by Wehrmacht officers, Nazi wives, collaborators, all Aryan, all safe, all unaware that the young blonde woman by the window was exactly the kind of person their laws demanded be exterminated. For the next 2 years, Marie Jalowicz would live an impossible existence. A Jewish woman living openly in Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, not hiding in attics or basements, but walking the streets, working in factories, eating in cafes, going to the movies, surviving in plain sight through the boldest disguise imaginable, pretending to be exactly what it was illegal to be. The Nazis looked for Jews in hiding. They never thought to look in their own spaces. Question for the comments: would you have had the courage to do what Marie did, knowing that a single mistake meant not only your death, but the death of everyone who helped you? Or would you have chosen the traditional hiding place? This is the story of how a 21-year-old Jewish woman survived the Holocaust without hiding. How extreme audacity turned out to be safer than caution. And how one woman outplayed the Third Reich simply by refusing to vanish. Part 1. Life before invisibility. Marie Jalowicz was born on March 2nd, 1922 in Berlin, the only child of a middle-class Jewish intellectual family. Her father, Hermann Jalowicz, was a professor of ancient history at the University of Berlin, specializing in Mediterranean civilizations. Her mother, Betty, was a concert pianist who had studied at the Vienna Conservatory. Marie's childhood unfolded in the elegant district of Prenzlauer Berg, in an apartment filled with books, music, and endless conversations about philosophy, literature, and politics. They were secular Jews, fully assimilated into German culture. Yiddish wasn't spoken at home. The synagogue was rarely visited. Jewish identity was more ethnic than religious, something on a passport more than something lived day to day. Hermann Jalowicz saw himself as German first, Jewish second. He had served in World War I, earning the Iron Cross for bravery. He believed deeply in Bildung, the German ideal of self-cultivation through education and culture. To him, being German meant Goethe, Schiller, Beethoven, not race or religion. Marie inherited that outlook. She grew up reading the German classics, memorizing German poetry, seeing herself as entirely Berlin through and through. When other children called her Jewish, she responded with genuine confusion. Wasn't she simply German? The answer arrived gradually, then suddenly, then brutally. In 1933, when Marie was 11, Hitler came to power. At first, the changes were subtle. Her father was forced to retire from the university. Marie was expelled from the gymnasium where she studied. Signs appeared in parks, Jews forbidden. Then at swimming pools, then at cinemas, then everywhere. By 1938, the Jalowich family was living in an apartment that kept getting smaller, forced to move again and again as housing laws restricted where Jews could live. Marie's father, a man who had devoted his life to Greek history, now worked in a factory sorting scrap metal. Professional dignity collapsed into daily survival. Kristallnacht, on November 9, 1938, destroyed any remaining illusions. Marie was 16. From her window, she watched mobs smash Jewish shops, burn synagogues, drag Jewish men from their homes. The message was unmistakable. Jews had no future in Germany. Hermann Jalowich tried to obtain immigration visas. Every country shut its doors. Palestine required certificates that never came. The United States had quotas filled out until 1950. South America, Australia, China. Everything was either impossible or prohibitively expensive, and the family no longer had the money. In 1941, when the mass deportations began, Marie understood the truth her father still refused to accept. They would not escape legally. The only options left were to disappear or die. Her mother, Betty, was deported in January 1942 to the Riga ghetto. Marie never saw her again. She was murdered in Auschwitz on an unknown date, most likely in 1943. Her father, Hermann, died of a heart attack in June 1942. Broken by the loss of his wife, his career, his country, and his illusion that Germany still considered him German. Marie, at 20 years old, was completely alone in a city where her existence was illegal. Part 2. The decision to disappear, June 1942. Marie received her deportation notice. She was ordered to report to the Sammellager on Lewitzowstrasse, the collection camp from which Berlin Jews were transported east. East meant death, though the Nazis called it resettlement. Marie had 3 options. The first, obey the notice, report for deportation, die in Poland or Belarus or wherever the trains ended. The second, kill herself before deportation, as thousands of Berlin Jews had already done. The third, disappear. The third option was, on paper, impossible. Jews in Berlin were fully documented. Every person had an identity card stamped with a red J. Everyone had to wear the yellow star at all times. Everyone was registered to a specific address. Everyone received special ration coupons that only worked at designated shops. The Nazi system was a perfect bureaucratic prison. You didn't need walls when you had forms. Marie couldn't buy food without coupons. She couldn't rent a room without registration. She couldn't travel without permission. She couldn't work without authorization. She couldn't simply vanish, because every part of modern life required documents that identified her as Jewish. But Marie understood something many others didn't. The system had a massive blind spot. The Nazis had built their bureaucracy on the assumption of obedience. If a Jew simply didn't show up for deportation, if she simply removed the yellow star and walked freely, who would stop her? The answer, no one, if you had enough nerve. Marie made her decision a week before her deportation date. She would not report. She would not hide in an attic. She would live openly in Berlin, disguised as Aryan. It was calculated madness. Berlin in 1942 still had roughly 50,000 Jews left from a pre-war population of 160,000. All watched, all documented, all destined for deportation. Of those 50,000, around 1,700 would eventually choose to live illegally rather than be deported. The Nazis called them U-Boote, submarines. People who had sunk beneath the surface of society. But most U-Boot hid in attics, basements, secret rooms. They depended on Aryan protectors who risked their lives to shelter them. It was a claustrophobic existence. Years in tiny spaces, constant silence, endless fear. Marie chose something completely different. She would not hide. She would hide in plain sight. The plan required three things: forged documents, an Aryan appearance, and absolute audacity. The documents were the hardest. Marie needed an identity card without the red J, valid ration coupons, maybe a work certificate. Through contacts in the underground Jewish community, Marie found Emil, a forger operating out of an apartment in Kreuzberg. Emil was a professional criminal who had discovered that forging papers for desperate Jews was more profitable than any other wartime crime. "What do you need?" Emil asked bluntly. "Everything," Marie said. "A full identity. That costs." "How much?" 2,000 Reichsmarks. Marie didn't have 2,000 Reichsmarks. She had exactly 200 saved from selling her parents' belongings. But she negotiated. In the end, Emil agreed to 500 Reichsmarks for a basic package: a forged identity card under the name Marie Müller, a work certificate for a munitions factory, and ration coupons for the current month. "The papers are good," Emil warned, "but not perfect. Under a superficial check, they'll pass. Under a detailed inspection by a Gestapo expert, they'll fail. Your job is to never allow a detailed inspection." "How do I do that?" Emil smiled cynically. "By acting more confident than they are suspicious. The best disguise isn't the papers, it's your behavior." Marie understood. The Nazis were looking for terrified, nervous Jews who avoided eye contact. If she did the exact opposite, confident, direct, mildly annoyed at being questioned, she would break their expectations. Appearance was easier. Marie was naturally blonde with blue eyes, the exact Aryan type Nazi propaganda glorified. Her German was perfect Berlin German, no accent, no giveaway quirks. Physically, she was indistinguishable from millions of Aryan German women. But audacity was the critical ingredient. Marie would have to walk through Berlin without the yellow star, look policemen in the eyes, interact with Nazis without revealing the microscopic terror she felt every second. On June 22, 1942, the day she was supposed to report for deportation, Marie tore off the yellow star, placed her forged papers in her handbag, and walked out of her apartment for the last time. She never returned. That apartment, that name, that life ended. Marie Jalowich, registered Jew, ceased to exist on paper. Marie Müller, Aryan factory worker, began to breathe. Part 3. The first days of invisibility. The first 3 days were the most terrifying. Marie had rehearsed every scenario in her mind, but reality surpassed imagination. Every policeman was a potential threat. Every passerby was a possible informant. Every casual question felt like an interrogation in disguise. Her first test came while walking through Alexanderplatz. A police officer stopped her routinely, checking papers from random pedestrians. Marie watched him examine the person in front of her, then prepared herself. "Papers," the officer ordered when it was her turn. Marie handed over her forged identity card with the casual confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. The officer glanced at it, compared it to her face, and handed it back. "Thank you, Fräulein Müller." Marie walked away on trembling legs. It had worked. First test passed. But the tests never stopped. Berlin in 1942 was a police state in its most advanced form. Papers were checked at train stations, at entrances to public buildings, in random street sweeps. The city was a web of checkpoints designed to catch exactly people like Marie. Her strategy was simple. Behave exactly like a young Aryan Berlin worker. That meant public complaints about rationing, casual remarks about Allied bombings, even lightly participating in conversations that blamed Jews. It was sickening, but necessary. Once, on a packed tram, an older woman launched into a rant about how Jews had caused the war. Marie, sitting beside her, nodded with a neutral expression. Every fiber of her being screamed to argue, but silence was survival. Another time, in a ration line, a man casually asked where she worked. Marie had her story ready. A munitions factory in Spandau, night shift, producing cartridge casings. The man nodded without suspicion. It was perfectly ordinary. Exactly what millions of German women were doing during the war. Nights were the biggest problem. Marie had no permanent apartment. She couldn't register at any address. Registration could alert the authorities. She needed places to sleep that required no official paperwork. Her first solution was train stations. Berlin in 1942 was bombed constantly by the British. Train stations filled up nightly with people waiting for delayed trains, taking shelter from raids, or simply having nowhere better to go. Marie could sleep on benches without drawing attention. Uncomfortable, but workable. Then she discovered air raid shelters. When the siren sounded, all of Berlin ran into underground bunkers. Nobody checked papers when bombs were falling. Marie spent whole nights in shelters, sleeping on concrete floors surrounded by terrified Aryan families. The irony was vicious. Allied bombers trying to kill Nazis also threatened her life. But the bombings provided perfect cover. Food was another critical issue. Without enough valid ration coupons, Marie had three options: steal, use the black market, or work for food. Stealing was too risky. Arrest meant identity checks that would expose everything. The black market worked, but it required money that ran out fast. So Marie found work, informal jobs that didn't require full official registration, cleaning out bombed apartments, sorting rubble at destruction sites, unloading supplies in warehouses. Work nobody wanted to do, but that paid in food or small amounts of cash. Her employers were usually Aryan Germans, desperate for workers, with most men at the front. They asked few questions. As long as you worked hard, your story didn't matter much. Marie became an expert at these exchanges. She would show up at construction sites early in the morning. "Do you need help?" she'd ask directly. If they said yes, she worked the full day for food and 5 or 10 Reichsmarks. If they said no, she tried the next site. It was a fragile, day-to-day existence, but it worked. Every day she wasn't captured was a victory. Every week added confidence. Every month proved the impossible was possible. Part 4. The Network of the Invisible. Marie soon discovered she wasn't alone. Berlin harbored an entire community of U-boot, submarines living beneath the surface. Most were Jews, but there were also communists, army deserters, homosexuals, anyone whose existence the Nazi regime had criminalized. This underground world communicated through informal networks. One person knew someone who knew someone else. Safe addresses were passed in whispers. Warnings about raids spread instantly. There was no formal organization, only instinctive solidarity. Marie met Wilhelm in October 1942. He was Jewish, around 40, and had been a lawyer before Jews were banned from practicing law. Now he lived illegally in Berlin, just like Marie, surviving under a false identity. Wilhelm became her mentor. He taught her the techniques he'd learned in his own months underground. Never take the same route 2 days in a row, he instructed. The Gestapo looks for patterns. If they see you in the same cafe every morning, sooner or later they'll start to wonder. Change your appearance regularly. A scarf one day, a hat the next. Hair up, hair down. Nothing dramatic, just enough that witnesses can't describe you the same way every time. Never make real friends with Aryans. Friendship creates trust. Trust creates confessions. Confessions create betrayal. Keep every relationship superficial. If someone suspects you, disappear from that area immediately. Don't wait for confirmation. Suspicion is enough. Berlin is huge. Find another neighborhood. Marie absorbed every lesson, but she also developed her own strategies. She discovered that acting slightly irritated when her papers were checked, rather than nervous, reduced suspicion. Officers expected illegal Jews to be terrified. A woman annoyed by the inconvenience looked genuinely innocent. She also learned to weaponize Nazi arrogance against them. Once, an officer questioned her story again and again. Instead of shrinking, Marie responded with perfectly performed indignation. Are you suggesting I'm lying? I work 12 hours a day making munitions for our soldiers, and you interrogate me like a criminal? What kind of Germany is this, where loyal workers are treated with suspicion? The officer, embarrassed at being accused of disrespecting a patriotic Aryan woman, apologized and let her go. It was dangerous theater, but it worked. The Nazis had created a social hierarchy where hard-working Aryan women deserved respect. Marie exploited that hierarchy by acting exactly as the system said she should act. Through Wilhelm, Marie met other submarines. Ruth, 19, lived in the attic of a communist sympathizer. David, a 50-year-old merchant, slept in different factories every night, pretending to be a shift worker. Gertrude, 30, had dyed her hair blonde and worked as a waitress in a cafe frequented by Wehrmacht officers, hiding literally under their noses. Each person had their own survival strategy. Some, like Ruth, depended on a generous Aryan protector. Others, like David, stayed constantly on the move. Marie took a middle path, semi-constant movement combined with public audacity. The problem with Aryan protectors was twofold. First, they were risking their lives. Hiding Jews could mean deportation or execution. Second, it created dependency. If the protector was arrested or simply decided the risk was too great, the submarine was left with nothing. Marie preferred independence. It was more dangerous, but it gave her control. She chose where to go, when to move, how much risk to take. But even independence required occasional help. Marie developed a relationship with Frau Becker, a 60-year-old Aryan woman who ran a small boarding house in Neukölln. Frau Becker never asked too much, but sometimes allowed Marie to rent a room for a night without official registration. "Don't tell me anything," Frau Becker said every time. "What I don't know, I can't reveal." It was an arrangement that helped both of them. Marie got an occasional safe room. Frau Becker got extra money, and probably the quiet feeling that she was doing something morally right without taking on too much personal risk. The submarine's community also provided critical intelligence. If a raid happened in a certain district, word spread instantly. If a specific batch of forged documents was discovered, everyone knew to avoid that type. If a particularly diligent Gestapo officer was assigned to an area, submarines avoided that zone. It was improvised intelligence, but effective, built by people whose survival depended on information. Part 5. working in the factory. In November 1942, Marie secured a more permanent job at a munitions factory in Spandau. It was exactly the kind of job her forged documentation listed, making her cover story more believable. The factory employed mostly women. German men were at the front, so war production depended on female labor. The workers were mainly Aryan German women, but also some forced laborers from Eastern Europe and, ironically, some Jews in forced labor clearly marked with yellow stars. Marie worked on the assembly line producing cartridge casings. It was repetitive, physically brutal labor, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. But it brought critical advantages: a regular wage, factory cafeteria meals, and an environment where nobody asked personal questions. The job was also perfect cover. When police asked why she was in a certain part of Berlin, she could answer truthfully that she worked at a munitions factory. She had real hours, a real time card, real co-workers who could confirm she existed. Her co-workers were mostly young women, 18 to 30, from different backgrounds. Some were enthusiastic Nazis. Others were ordinary Germans just trying to survive the war. Very few voiced open anti-Nazi sentiments. It was too dangerous. Marie kept every interaction superficial, friendly but never intimate, participating but never revealing personal details. Her cover story was simple: father killed on the Eastern Front, mother killed in a bombing, no family left, living in a boarding house, working to contribute to the war effort. It was the kind of story that earned sympathy without inviting questions. Millions of German women had similar stories by 1942. One co-worker, Lotte, became especially friendly. Lotte was 22, from a deeply committed Nazi family. Her father was a high-ranking SS officer. But Lotte was genuinely kind, sharing lunch, inviting Marie to social activities. Marie had to navigate the friendship carefully. Refusing every invitation would look suspicious. Accepting too many would create dangerous intimacy. So she accepted occasionally: a movie, a walk in the park, but always had excuses to keep distance. The most surreal part was working alongside Jewish women in forced labor. These women wore yellow stars, were watched by supervisors, lived in barracks. They were treated as less than human. And Marie, identical to them except for audacity and forged papers, worked as their Aryan superior. Once, in the cafeteria, Marie accidentally sat near the Jewish forced laborers. A supervisor shouted at her to move. "You don't mix with Jews," he ordered. Marie moved obediently, burning with shame and rage. These women were her people. They shared the same fate, except Marie had chosen a different path. Seeing them treated like animals while she pretended to be Aryan filled her with self-loathing and determination at the same time. The factory also gave her access to the black market. Some women trafficked illegal goods, extra food, cigarettes, toiletries. Marie occasionally participated, buying what she needed with her scarce savings. Those exchanges created complicity. If Marie was criminally involved in the black market, the other women had reason not to report her even if they suspected something. It was a cruel calculation, but effective. In a regime where everything was a crime, mutual complicity created protective silence. Part 6. The Close Calls. Despite all her preparation and audacity, Marie had dozens of encounters that nearly ended her life. Each one taught her something new about survival. January 1943. Marie was walking on Friedrichstrasse when she recognized a former classmate from before the war. The woman, now in uniform as a Nazi auxiliary, recognized her too. "Marie Jalowich?" she asked, confused. "Weren't you deported?" Marie had no time to think. "You've mistaken me for someone else," she said firmly. "My name is Marie Muller. No, I'm sure you're Marie Jalowich. We went to the gymnasium together." "You're wrong," Marie cut in, with perfectly acted irritation. "I never went to a gymnasium. I worked in my family's shop until the war started." The woman hesitated. Marie stared straight back, daring her. Finally, the auxiliary shrugged. "Sorry, my mistake." When she walked away, Marie had to fight the urge to run. She walked normally for 2 blocks, then entered a department store, slipped out through multiple exits, changed her route completely. She never returned to that part of the city. February 1943. During a document check at a train station, an officer noticed her identity card had a slightly irregular serial number. "Wait here," he ordered, taking the card to verify it with a supervisor. Marie watched him head toward an office. She had maybe 30 seconds before the forgery was discovered. The station was crowded, multiple exits. If she ran, she'd confirm suspicion. If she waited, arrest was inevitable. She chose to walk, firmly, not running, toward another exit, like a woman who had just remembered she'd miss her train. She left the station just as she heard a whistle behind her. She didn't look back. She merged into the street crowd, changed direction 3 times, vanished. She lost that identity card, but escaped arrest. She needed new papers, which meant finding a meal again and spending money she didn't have. April 1943. A firefighter in a temporary apartment building asked her persistent, casual questions about her family, her past, why she had no photos of relatives. The questions sounded innocent, but Marie sensed curiosity turning toward suspicion. That night, she packed her few belongings and left. She never returned. Better to lose a rental deposit than risk being reported. July 1943. Marie was in a cinema watching propaganda newsreels when the lights suddenly came on. "Document check," a Gestapo officer announced. "Nobody leaves." Worst case scenario: a full theater, 1 exit, systematic inspection. Marie was trapped mid-row. Every second the officer got closer. She studied his method. He checked young men quickly, focusing on deserters. For young women, he barely looked, assuming they weren't serious threats. When he reached Marie, she was reading a propaganda leaflet she'd picked up at the entrance. "Papers," the officer ordered. Marie handed over her card while continuing to read, as if the interruption were a minor annoyance. He checked it, compared it to her face, noticed she was still reading with what looked like genuine interest in Nazi propaganda. He handed it back. "Thank you." It was micropsychology. A woman genuinely interested in Nazi propaganda was probably a loyal Aryan. Marie played the role perfectly, but each close call frayed her nerves. Living under constant strain was psychological exhaustion. Marie developed insomnia, lost dramatic weight, and had nightmares whenever she managed to sleep. And yet, she also developed a strange confidence. Every survived encounter added proof it could be done. The Nazis weren't omniscient. Their system had cracks. Audacity worked. Part 7. The Bombings and the Irony. By mid-1943, Berlin was being bombed almost every night by the British RAF. Sirens wailed, the city ran to bunkers, bombs fell, wiping out entire neighborhoods. For Marie, the bombings were a blessing and a curse at the same time. A curse because she could die like any Berliner. A blessing because the chaos provided perfect cover for her illegal existence. During raids, document checks stopped. Nobody asked for identity cards when buildings were collapsing. Bunkers filled with people from every background, briefly equal in shared terror. Rich and poor, Nazi and non-Nazi, everyone was the same beneath tons of concrete, praying the bombs didn't hit their particular shelter. Marie spent multiple nights a week in bunkers. She met ordinary Berliners, listened to their conversations, learned what Aryan Germans thought and felt about the war. What she found was complicated. Many still supported Hitler, believing Germany would eventually win. But a growing number whispered doubts carefully. News from the front was worse and worse. Stalingrad had been a catastrophic defeat. The Afrika Korps had surrendered. Italy had switched sides. German invincibility was clearly a fiction. But voicing doubt publicly was treason. So people lived a double life. Nazi enthusiasm in public, private, despair in cautious conversations with trusted people. Marie watched that split consciousness with fascination. The same Berliners shouting "Heil Hitler" at rallies whispered, "When will this madness end?" in dark bunkers. The cruelest irony was that Allied bombings meant to destroy the Nazi regime also killed people like Marie, people the regime was hunting. From 10,000 meters up, the Allies couldn't distinguish Nazis from victims. One night in August 1943, Marie almost died in a particularly severe raid. She was in a bunker beneath an apartment building in Charlottenburg when a direct hit collapsed part of the structure. The shelter filled with smoke and dust. The lights went out. People screamed in darkness. Marie felt the ceiling pressing downward, heard concrete cracking. For a moment, she thought this was finally her death. Not in a gas chamber like the Nazis planned, but under a British bomb meant to free her. But the bunker held. Rescue teams arrived 3 hours later. Marie emerged covered in dust, ears ringing, but alive. That night, sleeping in a train station because her temporary apartment had been destroyed, Marie thought about the absurdity of her situation. The Nazis wanted to kill her because she was Jewish. The Allies wanted to kill her without knowing she was Jewish. She was caught between two massive forces, both potentially lethal, navigating day by day on wit and luck. The bombings also created opportunities. After major raids, Berlin desperately needed workers to clear rubble, recover bodies, repair infrastructure. Marie worked in cleanup crews, horrific work, but it paid and provided food. Nobody checked documents of people willing to dig through ruins filled with corpses. She worked in neighborhoods reduced to nothing. Buildings vaporized, entire families dead in their cellars. She hauled debris by hand, found bodies burned beyond recognition, helped rescue survivors trapped under rubble. It showed her the brutal reality of war. Nazi propaganda spoke of heroism and victory. Reality was random death and indiscriminate suffering. The Berliners she helped rescue were mostly Aryan Germans, the folk Nazi ideology glorified. But beneath the rubble, covered in dust and blood, grieving their dead, they were simply human beings in pain. Marie felt compassion for them, even as she knew many probably supported the regime that had marked her for extermination. It was a moral paradox she never fully resolved. Part 8. The Impossible Romance. In September 1943, Marie met Hans. He was a Wehrmacht soldier on medical leave after being wounded on the Eastern Front. He was 28, from a conservative Bavarian family. Everything Marie was not. Aryan, Christian, part of the system that hunted her. They met in a cafe near the factory where Marie worked. Hans was alone. Marie was alone. He started with small talk, weather, bombings, rationing. Ordinary conversation, the kind millions of people had daily in almost wartime Berlin. But it became something else. Hans was thoughtful, clearly traumatized by what he'd seen. He didn't speak with Nazi enthusiasm about glorious victory. He spoke with exhaustion, about horror, dead comrades, the meaninglessness of it all. Marie, still living as Marie Müller, shared an edited version of her own reality. Parents dead because of the war, loneliness, constant fear of bombings. It was close enough to the truth that she could speak from something real. They met again. Walks through bombed parks, coffee in places still open, an occasional movie. Hans was gentle, attentive, clearly drawn to her, romantically and humanly. Marie knew it was absolute madness. If Hans discovered her real identity, his military duty was to report her. Even if he personally didn't want to, the consequences of not reporting a known Jew were severe. Court-martial, possibly execution for treason. But after months of isolation, human connection was a powerful hunger. Marie longed to be seen as a full person, not just a desperate fugitive or an anonymous factory worker. With Hans, she could almost be a normal woman in a normal relationship. One night, Hans kissed her. It was the first intimate physical contact Marie had experienced in over a year. For a moment, she let herself forget who she was, where she was, what she was risking. Then reality hit like cold water. She couldn't continue. It was danger, for her and for him. If it ever came out that he'd had a romance with a Jewish woman, even unknowingly, he'd be investigated, possibly punished. The next time they met, Marie ended it. She invented a story. She was engaged to a soldier on the front, officially declared dead. But she still believed he might somehow be alive. It was specific enough to create a wall and impossible for Hans to verify. Hans accepted it, devastated. If anything changes, if you find out he's truly gone and you're ready, come find me, he said. Marie nodded, knowing she never would. Hans returned to the front 2 weeks later. Marie never learned whether he survived the war. It was a brief human connection that proved both the possibility of shared humanity and the impossibility of normal life under dictatorship. Part 9. Surviving until liberation. The last 18 months of the war were both easier and more dangerous for Marie. Easier because the growing chaos of a collapsing Germany made document checks less systematic. More dangerous because the Nazi regime, in its death throes, became more brutal, executing traitors and enemies on the spot. By late 1943, it was obvious to anyone with eyes that Germany was losing. The Soviets were advancing from the east. The Western Allies had invaded Italy. Berlin was bombed night after night. Rationing grew harsher. Civilian morale collapsed. But Nazi propaganda never admitted defeat. They spoke of miracle weapons that would turn the war around, of imminent counteroffensives, of guaranteed final victory. It was mass delusion sustained by terror and desperate hope. Marie kept working, moving, surviving. By early 1944, she had built a network. Several employers who hired her without questions, half a dozen places she could sleep occasionally, a different forger after Emil was arrested, and several fellow submarines with whom she exchanged information. It was more stable than the first months, but still fragile. Every day carried risk. Every week she heard of submarines arrested. The Gestapo had intensified its hunt for illegal Jews, especially after the mass deportations from Berlin were completed in 1943. The remaining submarines were unfinished business the regime wanted to erase. Marie was nearly caught in March 1944 when the Gestapo raided the building where she was staying. She heard boots on the stairs, voices ordering everyone out. No hiding place. No escape route. She would have to pass the Gestapo on the staircase. She decided instantly, act completely normal. She walked down with a laundry basket, like a woman simply going to do her wash. She passed 3 Gestapo agents focused on moving upward. One told her careful casually as she went by. Marie said thanks and walked out into the street. She never returned. She lost her few possessions, but saved her life. In July 1944, after the failed assassination attempt on Hitler, the regime turned brutally paranoid. Thousands were arrested and executed for suspected disloyalty. The streets became dangerous in new ways. Any unusual behavior could lead to arrest. Paradoxically, that atmosphere of universal suspicion helped Marie. When everyone was suspect, nobody was specifically suspect. The Gestapo was overwhelmed chasing political conspiracies, leaving fewer resources to hunt individual Jews. By late 1944, with the Red Army closing in from the east, Berlin entered its final chaos. Mass evacuations, government buildings burning, documents, Nazi officials fleeing. The bureaucratic system that had made illegal life so hard began to collapse. Marie now lived more or less permanently in air raid shelters. Berlin was bombed so constantly that thousands of people simply lived underground. Nobody checked documents in bunkers when the city was on fire above. January 1945. The Soviets were only kilometers from Berlin. The sound of artillery was constant. The city had become a war zone. Fear was everywhere. Berliners knew Soviet liberation would be brutal. Reports had spread about what the Red Army did in occupied territories: mass rape, looting, summary executions. Marie faced a new irony: surviving the Holocaust only to potentially be raped or killed by the army that was freeing her. But she had no choices left. Like everyone else in Berlin, she waited, hoping the end would come quickly and that somehow she would survive it too. On April 21st, 1945, the Red Army entered Berlin. The Battle of Berlin began. For 10 days, the city became urban combat. Marie spent those days deep in a cellar with dozens of terrified Berliners, hearing tanks above them, constant explosions, screams. On May 2nd, 1945, Berlin surrendered. The Third Reich was over. Marie Jalowicz had survived. When she finally emerged from the bunker, Berlin was a smoking ruin. Soviet soldiers patrolled the streets. Corpses lay everywhere. The city was destroyed. But Marie was alive. 34 months living illegally in the capital of the Third Reich, posing as Ariane, working alongside Nazis, surviving through sheer audacity. She let go of the identity of Marie Müller. She took back her real name, Marie Jalowicz, a Jewish Berliner who had refused to disappear. Epilogue. Life after. In the months after liberation, Marie Jalowicz searched for surviving family members. She found none. Parents, cousins, uncles, everyone was dead. She was completely alone. But she rebuilt her life. She studied literature at Humboldt University in Berlin under the Soviet-backed government of East Germany. She became a professor of classical literature, ironically teaching the same Greek and Latin texts her father had taught decades earlier. She married a fellow Holocaust survivor. They had a son. They lived in East Berlin for decades, navigating a different kind of dictatorship under communism. Marie rarely spoke about what she had lived through during the war. It was too traumatic, too complicated, too hard to explain how she survived by pretending to be a Nazi among Nazis. Only in 2004, at 82, did she finally give a long series of interviews to her son, documenting her entire story. Those interviews were published posthumously as Underground in Berlin in 2014. Marie Jalowicz died in 2012 at the age of 90, having lived the full life the Third Reich had declared impossible. Every day after May 2nd, 1945 was a victory over the system that had decreed her death. Her story raises questions with no simple answers. Why do some people survive while others don't? Was it skill, luck, audacity, or just arbitrary chance? How much heroism is there in survival, and how much is simply refusing to die? Marie never considered herself a heroine. She saw herself as a woman who did what she had to do to keep breathing. But in that simple act, refusing to vanish, choosing to rip off the yellow star and walk freely through a city that had ordered her extermination, there was something profoundly heroic. The Nazis never suspected that a Jewish woman was walking among them. Marie Jalowicz defeated the Third Reich not with weapons, but with audacity. Not with armies, but with perfect performance. Not by hiding, but by becoming impossibly visible. She posed as German. She survived in plain sight. And in that survival, she proved that even the most totalitarian system has cracks wide enough for a determined woman to slip through to freedom. 800 Jews saved by a watchmaker, hiding them in an 80-centimeter space. One Jewish woman saved by herself through disguise in the Nazi capital. 2 Holocaust stories. 2 survival strategies. 2 impossible victories against industrialized evil. The lesson isn't that one strategy was better than the other. It's that people found 1,000 different ways to resist, to survive, to refuse to be erased. Some hidden behind walls, some hidden in plain sight, some fighting with weapons, some fighting with wit. All heroes, all remembered. All proof that humanity endures even when massive systems try to destroy it. Marie Jalowicz lived until 2012. The Third Reich died in 1945. In the end, she outlived them by 67 years. That is the final victory.